A defeated voice declares a complete loss of attachment to this rotten world. Seeking a final release, the afflicted soul believes that passing on will permanently shield them from any future betrayals. The broken man finds comfort in the thought that he will never be looked down upon again. Trembling at the very edge of absolute despair, an unexpected hand gently extends toward the afflicted figure. A sudden, comforting presence physically reaches out to warmly embrace the despondent soul. Stunned by the gentle gesture, the bewildered man wonders who is holding him with such incredible warmth. Smiling brightly, the girl introduces herself to Lord Reynold as Florina, the woman destined to become his wife. Surging with magic and devotion, the uninvited wife proudly displays her cheat-level powers of boundless love. The narrative perspective shifts as the determined bride finally approaches the grand, isolated estate. Pausing for a brief moment, she gathers her boundless resolve before taking the next vital step. Having traveled across the entire kingdom, the determined bride finally reaches the long-awaited moment of her journey. Bursting with anticipation, Florina excitedly prepares for the exact moment she will finally become that special person's wife. Standing before the decaying estate, she cheerfully rationalizes that her future husband must simply prefer old-fashioned buildings since it clearly has not been maintained in a long time. Clenching her fist with renewed resolve, the determined bride steels herself for the physical challenge ahead. Grunting with exertion, Florina struggles to push against the incredibly heavy wooden doors of the estate. Peeking into the vast space, she politely excuses her intrusion and calls out to see if anyone is home. Stepping cautiously inside, she quickly realizes that her cheerful greeting is met with absolute silence. Catching her reflection in a broken mirror, the anxious girl wonders where that specific person could be hiding. Moving deeper into the ruined foyer, a tense heartbeat echoes as the eerie environment swallows her steps. Immersed in the pitch-dark interior, Florina observes the terrifying absence of any working lights. Surveying the grim surroundings, her heart thumps as she notes that thick spider webs completely cover every corner of the abandoned mansion. Processing the absolute ruin of the decaying house, a sudden realization strikes her. Instead of recoiling in fear, a brilliant spark of inspiration suddenly washes over the optimistic girl. Springing into decisive action, she firmly plants her feet to unleash her unique magical abilities. With a powerful shout, she summons her glowing spirits of light to her side. Commanding her tiny, squeaking companions, she tasks them with fully purifying the interior of the filthy mansion. Darting through the air with incredible speed, the energetic familiars immediately begin blasting away the grime. Channeling her immense magical power, Florina works perfectly in tandem with her familiars to cleanse the darkness. Watching the dust settle into sparkling motes around the gleaming chandelier, she gratefully thanks her spirit friends for their hard work. Striking a confident pose amidst the freshly restored architecture, Florina proudly declares her very first job completely finished. Looking outside, Florina cheerfully decides she should clean the garden later as well. Suddenly, a mysterious shadow of someone with wings looms over the unsuspecting girl. A voice suddenly calls out Florina's name from behind. Startled by the sudden call, she quickly turns around in surprise. A woman firmly warns Florina not to use her magical power too much. The woman explains that forcing herself to use that power will inevitably damage her body. Smiling warmly, Florina gently thanks Livia for worrying about her well-being. Bursting with determination, she insists she is completely fine and would do anything to meet him soon. Livia quietly asks if this man is truly that important to her. With tears welling in her eyes, Florina passionately confirms that he is her lifesaver. Transitioning into a flashback, she recalls being born into the Rosenheim noble family of the Griffiths kingdom, where deepening ties in high society from a young age was strictly required. As a small child, a nervous young Florina shyly hides behind her mother's dress at a crowded, elegant gathering. Other nobles cheerfully greet Lady Rosenheim as the timid girl clings to her skirts. Suddenly, the young girl's vision blurs as a wave of intense dizziness strikes her. Struggling to hold onto the staircase railing, she narrates that she suffered from a very specific and troubling problem. Realizing an attack is imminent, she mentally panics and desperately tries to fight off the sudden exhaustion. Fighting the overwhelming drowsiness, she fears that falling asleep in public will only cause massive trouble for her family once again. A panicked voice screams Florina's name as her consciousness finally slips away. A crowd quickly gathers around her unconscious body at the bottom of the stairs, frantically calling for anyone who can use healing magic. She explains that she suffered from narcolepsy, a severe illness where the afflicted suddenly loses consciousness and cannot control their sleep. The terrifying disease of unknown cause progressively extends the victim's sleeping hours until they eventually never wake up again. Because this incurable illness strictly afflicts those with extremely low magical power, the general public heavily stigmatized it. Cruel society blatantly discriminated against victims, labeling the condition a cursed disease that proved the gods had completely abandoned them. Surrounding nobles viciously whisper insults, calling the unconscious girl a cursed disgrace and worrying she might infect their own children. A malicious noble sneers down at her, ruthlessly stating that it would be better for everyone if she just hurried up and died. Suddenly, a powerful and authoritative voice cuts through the cruel whispers, commanding the crowd to make way. A tall, strikingly handsome man dressed in an elegant white uniform steps forward through the parted crowd. The watching nobles immediately begin swooning as they recognize the approaching man as Lord Reynold, the esteemed chancellor. Horrified onlookers desperately beg Lord Reynold not to approach a child infected with the stigmatized narcolepsy. Completely ignoring the frantic warnings of the nobles, Lord Reynold swiftly reaches his hand out toward the fallen girl. A solitary number marks the beginning of the recounted memory. While healing magic can easily close wounds, it remains completely ineffective at improving the debilitating symptoms of narcolepsy. They explains that drawing out accumulated excess magic is necessary, as ambient magic acts as a deadly poison to a child born without magical power. This magical narcolepsy is revealed to be a biological rejection response rather than a cursed disease. The sleeping young girl's eyes flutter open as a gentle voice softly asks if she is finally awake. She is greeted by the warm and reassuring gaze of a strikingly handsome young man surrounded by a soft aura. The young girl stares up in absolute awe at the radiant figure who has just brought her back from the brink. Overwhelmed with immense gratitude toward the man who saved her, the young girl tearfully thanks Lord Reynold Gungnir. Lord Reynold diligently visits the mansion every single day for a month to administer a bitter but necessary medicine for her treatment. He gently pats her head, promising that continuously drinking the bitter medicine will gradually help her regain her lost strength. Smiling kindly, he notes that her symptoms have calmed down significantly as she finally begins to build a natural resistance to magic. Tucking her safely into bed, Reynold reassures her that she has absolutely nothing to worry about anymore, even when he is not around. With his duty fulfilled, the handsome mage turns away and steps toward the heavy wooden doors to take his leave. Although deeply relieved that her illness is finally getting better, the young girl's heart breaks at the painful realization that she might never see Lord Reynold again. Desperately clinging to hope, she boldly begs him to wait as she imagines surviving until her 18th birthday. Turning back to face her, he listens in stunned silence as the little girl earnestly pleads for him to marry her. Back in the present, a radiant Florina joyfully attributes her survival to Reynold's comforting promise to marry her just to ease her anxiety. She enthusiastically boasts that her beloved is an unparalleled genius and the youngest chancellor in history who deeply understands magic stones and beasts. She beams with immense pride as she declares that his incredible brilliance will effortlessly keep the entire kingdom secure for the next 100 years. Completely consumed by her deep affection, she dramatically insists that even praising him all night long simply wouldn't be enough. Confident in her beloved's charm, she cheerfully assures Livia that they will understand his extraordinary greatness the moment they finally meet him. Pausing her passionate rant, Florina wonders what is wrong as Livia expresses lingering confusion regarding her story. Livia correctly points out the stark contradiction that the mansion was found completely run down with absolutely no signs of recent visitors. Adding to the mystery, Livia notes that this dilapidated estate sits on the kingdom's remote frontier, over a week away from the bustling royal capital. The logical question is finally raised as to why such a highly celebrated and profoundly important man would be living in such utter ruin. Caught completely off guard by the undeniable logic, Florina hesitates as she struggles to formulate a reasonable explanation. Before she can answer, an ominous shadow looms over her as a disturbing, mechanical grinding noise echoes through the hall. A panicked cry rings out, prompting Florina to whip around and frantically ask her little spirit friend what is wrong. The tiny, glowing spirit squeals in utter terror as it frantically tries to escape its sudden predicament. Seeing her adorable companion helplessly tangled within thick vines, Florina leaps into action and promises to free it immediately. Holding her tiny familiar, Florina looks on in confusion at a strange sight. Staring in shock at the massive, pulsating fungal growth blocking the double doors, she questions if it is truly a mushroom. Recognizing the grotesque growth, she quickly identifies it as a deadly venom mushroom. Recalling that it is a parasitic organism that drains the life force of animals, she wonders why it would be growing in such a place. Suddenly, an unseen voice urgently calls out Florina's name as she throws open the heavy doors. The frantic voice warns her to stay away from the doors because of the danger lurking beyond. Bursting into the room, Florina cries out to see if Lord Reynolds is inside. She discovers a man slumped in a chair, his body horrifyingly consumed by the parasitic fungus. The afflicted man breathes heavily as the monstrous growths snake across his pale skin. A weak, raspy gasp escapes the suffering man's lips. Recognizing his features, Florina breathlessly stammers out Lord Reynolds' name. Covering her mouth in absolute horror, tears well in her eyes as she screams for him. Rushing toward his slumped figure, she frantically asks if he is safe while noting the immediate danger of the venom mushroom. A bleak realization washes over her that he might already be beyond saving. She quickly recalls that this specific parasitic organism is extremely weak to sunlight. Connecting the facts, she realizes that since the fungus only inhabits remote places like caves, its presence here implies a darker truth. Staring at his corrupted body, she realizes with dread that he likely brought the parasite here on purpose to end his own life. A dark shadow looms in her mind as she wonders if this suicidal act is directly tied to his tragic past. Gritting her teeth, her thoughts drift back to the events that unfolded exactly 5 years ago. Flashbacks reveal an angry mob branding Lord Reynolds a traitor and screaming for him to get out of the country following his exile from the royal capital. In the brutal flashback, a heavy punch strikes Reynolds square in the face. The furious crowd verbally attacks him, accusing him of being a spy from a neighboring nation. Despite being the most talented and respected man in the kingdom, envious nobles orchestrated his downfall while he stood battered in chains. Shadowy figures fabricated baseless accusations that he was colluding with a neighboring country, ensuring he was punished as a great criminal and cast out. A desperate, fragmented plea for help echoes from the present. Snapping back to reality, Florina gasps as she witnesses his current agony. Brimming with determination, she boldly calls out to her suffering lord. Reaching out to his chest, she fiercely promises to save him right this instant and begs him to hold on. Thick, corrupted veins throb violently along Reynolds' neck as the parasite tightens its grip. Gazing up with hollow, defeated eyes, the broken man weakly begs her to just let him be at ease. Looking with unwavering resolve, Florina prepares to confront the dark reality before her. She sorrowfully reflects that for 5 grueling years, Lord Reynolds has been fighting all alone while trapped within the crushing darkness of absolute despair. Remembering her own tragic past, she acknowledges that he is the sole reason she was ever able to stand up again from her own darkness. Her heart swells with gratitude as she silently vows to return the favor since he was there to pull her back from the abyss. Suddenly, Lord Reynolds violently stomps his foot and desperately screams for her to stay away from his corrupted body. Terrified for her safety, he frantically warns her that one mistake could drag her down into his horrific fate. Completely ignoring his desperate warnings, Florina fiercely grabs his arm and vows that this time she will be the one to save him. She remains entirely unfazed by the cruel judgments of others, determined to stand by his side no matter what the rest of the world might say. Losing all hope, the afflicted man lashes out in pure agony and screams that he has absolutely no remaining attachment to this rotten world. Succumbing to his tragic fate, he weakly murmurs that he just wants to finally find peace in death. Suddenly, a warm sensation washes over him, leaving him completely bewildered as he feels his empty heart mysteriously filling up with life. Shocked by the comforting heat, he weakly wonders who could possibly be embracing his cursed form with such tender warmth. With a dramatic flourish of her dress, Florina lunges forward to close the distance between them entirely. Lord Reynolds' eyes widen in absolute horror and disbelief as the beautiful girl fearlessly throws herself against his infected body. Panicking that the dreadful parasite will infect her as well, he frantically tries to push the desperate girl away. Holding onto him tightly, Florina gently reassures the terrified man that there is absolutely no need to worry anymore. Gazing deeply into his panicked eyes, she softly pleads with him to place his complete trust in her. A blinding, radiant light suddenly erupts from Florina's body as her mysterious power activates against the deadly corruption. With a massive shockwave of pure magical energy, the intense light violently shatters the surrounding debris while she shields him in a tight embrace. A single tear slips down Reynolds' face as he stares in utter awe at the overwhelming miracle unfolding right before his eyes. Unyielding and sharply focused, Florina channels every ounce of her spirit into the incredibly powerful purification spell. As the intense magical light finally settles, they both gasp and stare at one another in the sudden, peaceful aftermath. Beaming with a radiant smile, Florina joyfully celebrates that she successfully executed her daring magic. Lord Reynolds looks down at his arm in total disbelief, completely stunned to see that the parasitic venom mushrooms have vanished without a trace. Still reeling from the shock, he slowly realizes that not only is he cured, but the entire dilapidated mansion is now brimming with pure energy. Exhausted from the massive effort, Florina pants heavily and sheepishly wonders if she overdid it with her magical output. Suddenly realizing the intensely intimate situation, her face flushes bright red as she panics over having so boldly hugged Lord Reynolds. Observing the wildly flustered young girl, a shadowy magical spirit sighs in fond exasperation at her sudden comedic panic. Reynolds sits completely dumbfounded on the pristine floor while countless adorable spirits happily bounce around the newly purified room. Quickly recovering her cheerful composure, Florina happily claps her hands together to thank all of her wonderful spirit friends for their invaluable help. Completely stunned by her casual revelation, the battered man repeats her claim about spirits in absolute disbelief. Surrounded by an adorable array of floating creatures, Florina cheerfully explains that her lack of natural magic forced her to borrow the power of the 7 great spirits. The magical creatures swarm affectionately as she expresses her profound relief at finally being able to save Lord Reynolds. Staring in absolute shock, Reynolds demands to know her true identity while declaring it entirely impossible for a mere human to contract with the 7 great spirits. Beaming with unparalleled pride amidst her summoned companions, she formally introduces herself as Florina and boldly claims the title of his future wife. Reynolds mentally reviews the fundamental laws of their world, noting that a person's magical capacity strictly dictates the magic they can wield. He reflects deeply on the fact that making a contract with even a single spirit is considered an exceptionally rare phenomenon. Continuing his internal shock, he realizes that ancient historical documents only contain a handful of confirmed spirit contracts. Gazing at the radiant young woman before him, he acknowledges that a human contracting with multiple great spirits has absolutely never been recorded in history. He surveys the bizarre and powerful menagerie floating around her, completely bewildered to spot water spirits, beast spirits, and even the elusive spirit of love. Slumping against the ruined wall, Reynolds asks in a breathless whisper if she truly managed to forge a contract with all 7 great spirits. Florina enthusiastically confirms her achievement, explaining she pushed herself to her absolute limits just to become useful to him. She passionately reveals that every single hardship she endured was entirely dedicated to fulfilling the promise they made when he cured her narcolepsy. A sudden, sharp realization pierces Reynolds' mind as a long-forgotten memory surges to the surface. He mutters the word narcolepsy under his breath as the puzzle pieces of his past finally begin to snap into place. Shock completely washes over his face as he vividly remembers a sick little girl desperately asking him to marry her if she survived to her 18th birthday. The memory shifts to his younger self, sitting dutifully in a grand bedroom while the frail child pulls her bedsheets up in shy anticipation. The younger Reynolds glances back at the tiny, bedridden girl who had just boldly proposed to him. Assuming she is simply too young to understand, his past self dismisses the proposal by reasoning she will inevitably forget him by the time she turns 18. He recalls agreeing to the childish promise for the sole purpose of easing the little girl's immediate anxiety. Snapping back to the present, he stares at the breathtakingly beautiful woman whose radiant smile perfectly mirrors the hopeful child from his memories. Connecting the final dots, Reynolds tentatively asks if she is the young patient he treated from the Rosenheim family. He carefully speaks her name aloud, asking for final confirmation that she is indeed Florina. Florina leans in aggressively with a massive, sparkling grin, absolutely thrilled that her beloved has finally remembered her. Reynolds nervously attempts to backtrack by explaining that he did make the promise, but only as a means to reassure a frightened child. He humbly tries to dismiss her overwhelming gratitude, insisting that merely making her medicine doesn't warrant such a lifelong debt. Leaning in even closer, Florina fiercely rejects his modesty and passionately declares that he completely changed her fate and is the sole reason she breathes. She proudly proclaims that she went to the extreme length of contracting with the spirits specifically to become a woman worthy of standing beside him. Continuing her relentless assault of unbelievable reveals, she cheerfully adds that she also managed to form a contract with a dragon. Reynold breaks into a cold sweat as he remembers reading forbidden archives about the spirit dragon, a mythological progenitor entity that stands as an equal to the creator god. Astonished by Florina's incredible magical display, Lord Reynold asks if she truly contracted with such an extraordinary being. Muttering that such a feat should be impossible for a mere human, Reynold's thought is suddenly interrupted when Florina looks around for her missing companion. Realizing her familiar has wandered off, the cheerful girl waves off the absence and promises to introduce her properly later. Eagerly changing the subject, she points an enthusiastic finger and asks if he is hungry while proudly declaring how much her cooking skills have improved over the past 5 years. Without waiting for an answer, she happily announces that she will go make him something delicious to eat. Left speechless by her overwhelming domestic energy, Lord Reynold stares blankly at the space she just occupied. Processing her sudden departure, he wonders if she was always this lively since he remembered her being a much quieter and more reserved woman. Looking down at his trembling hand, a bittersweet realization begins to form in his mind. A faint sense of relief washes over him as he softly admits he is glad she has finally been freed from her illness and no longer lives in fear of others' judgmental eyes. Turning his gaze toward the window, the heavy silence of the ruined estate pulls his thoughts back to a darker reality. Suddenly, his eyes widen in pure horror as a traumatic memory forcefully invades his peaceful moment. The phantom screams of an angry mob echo in his ears, viciously branding him a traitor and a spy from a neighboring country. The merciless voices from his past demand his immediate execution, dragging him back into his deepest trauma. Another spectral voice curses him to burn in hell, suffocating him with the weight of the kingdom's baseless hatred. Sinking deeper into despair, he reminds himself that there is no place left for him in this world because absolutely no one believed his desperate pleas of innocence. A dark shadow falls over his face as he dreads the inevitable moment Florina learns of his terrible reputation and turns against him too. Just as the darkness threatens to consume him entirely, the heavy doors crack open as a familiar face cheerfully peeks inside. Apologizing for the wait, the radiant bride steps into the room and announces the very first dish she has prepared for her beloved lord. Smiling from ear to ear, Florina proudly presents a steaming, sparkling bowl of freshly made rice porridge. She confidently explains that she infused the meal with special medicinal herbs to aid his digestion and guarantee he will feel better. Pausing mid-step, her bright expression falters slightly as she carefully observes his current physical condition. Softening her voice with concern, she gently asks Lord Reynold if his illness has completely drained the strength from his hands. Instantly recovering her boundless optimism, she cheerfully volunteers to feed him herself and playfully tells him to open wide. Rejecting her blinding warmth, the broken man lowers his head and coldly orders her to stop. Her bright eyes widen in surprise as the sudden hostility completely shatters the light-hearted atmosphere. Sitting lifelessly on the floor, Reynold apologizes but bluntly states he has no desire to eat, confessing that he has lost all will and value in living. Desperately clutching her tray, Florina begs him with tearful eyes to stop saying such heartbreaking things. Leaning in with absolute devotion, she vows to do whatever it takes and promises to take perfect care of him until his strength fully returns. Staring back with completely hollow, dead eyes, the ruined noble remains completely unmoved by her passionate declaration. Stripped of all hope and wanting only an end to his suffering, Lord Reynold delivers a crushing ultimatum for her to simply kill him. Lord Reynold bitterly asks if ending his life would be easy for her using her immense spirit power. Confessing his cowardice and fear of pain, he admits he relies on parasitic venom mushrooms because he lacks the courage to hang himself or pierce his own chest. He morbidly suggests that she could simply ask her spirits to kill him quickly and without any suffering. Gasping in horror at the dark request, Florina firmly declares that she will never allow such a terrible thing to happen. When he insists that no one will grieve his death, she fiercely shouts with tears in her eyes that she will. Hugging herself emotionally, she tearfully reminds Lord Reynold of his promise to marry her and asks if he knows how much hope that single vow gave her. She passionately vows to remain by his side forever, crediting his existence as the only reason she was ever able to keep living. Unable to handle the overwhelming emotion, Reynold violently sweeps a bowl off the table and screams for her to stop. Lashing out in defense, he cruelly lies that his promise was nothing but nonsense and claims he had completely forgotten about her until today. Gripping his head in panicked agony, he frantically shouts that everything she says and does makes him incredibly uncomfortable. Completely breaking down, he desperately begs the young woman to just disappear from his sight already. Florina stands completely frozen in stunned, heartbreaking silence. Silent tears stream down her face as his incredibly harsh words deeply pierce her heart. Realizing how terribly he just hurt her, Reynolds' eye widens in sudden, crushing regret. Hastily wiping her tears away, Florina forces a polite apology and awkwardly makes an excuse about having something in her eye. Forcing a cheerful tone, she abruptly announces she needs to go shopping in the village since she used up all the ingredients. She quickly excuses herself from the tense room, urging Lord Reynolds to take his time and rest. Reynolds is left sitting all alone on the cold floor of the massive, empty mansion. Staring dejectedly at the ground, he tries to convince his heavy heart that driving her away was ultimately for the best. Meanwhile, down in the lively frontier village, a cheerful little girl happily runs through the bustling marketplace. Florina quietly wanders through the village, her attention momentarily caught by the vibrant market stalls. Suddenly, the running little girl trips and takes a hard tumble right in front of Florina. The small child immediately bursts into loud wails as Florina gently reaches out to comfort her. Kneeling down with a warm smile, Florina gently embraces the sniffling girl and softly checks to see if she is okay. The girl's worried father quickly rushes over as the child happily calls out to him. The panicked father kneels down and urgently asks his precious daughter if she is hurt anywhere. He apologizes to Florina for his child causing trouble, but she quickly and kindly dismisses his concern. The father sighs that he always tells her not to run off, but Florina warmly replies that being energetic is a wonderful thing. Florina watches the sweet father-daughter interaction with a soft, deeply mesmerized expression. Turning her attention to his impressive stall, she cheerfully notes the abundant herbs and asks if this is his shop. A man praises his finest herbs grown on his farm, proudly noting they were freshly picked this morning. An elderly vendor suggests another shop with an impressive selection as Florina happily continues her shopping. She excitedly notes how lively the bustling market is despite being located on the kingdom's frontier. The vendor pauses his work to curiously ask the young lady if she is new to the area. Beaming with pride, she introduces herself as Florina and cheerfully declares she is the future wife of Lord Reynolds Gungnir. A heavy, stunned silence instantly falls over the surrounding crowd as the townspeople stare at her in absolute shock. The villagers stutter in sheer disbelief as they process the infamous name she just proudly announced. A shocked villager loudly questions if she truly intends to marry the man who resides in the dreaded demon's mansion. The crowd erupts into panic, calling him a great criminal who attempted to sell out the entire country. Back at the ruined estate, Reynolds turns his back as glowing feathers drift through the air, grimly accepting that Florina will not return. Slumping against the floor amidst scattered white wings, he heavily rationalizes that pushing her away first was the right choice. A mysterious voice suddenly breaks the silence, questioning if his deliberate cruelty was purely to drive her away. Panicking at the sudden intrusion, Reynolds whips his head around and demands to know who is hiding in the shadows. He instinctively covers his face as a massive, blinding surge of magical light explodes throughout the ruined hall. A colossal, shadowy beast materializes from the blinding light, towering ominously over the terrified mage. Staring up at the mythological entity, Reynolds correctly identifies the towering beast as a dragon. Absolute dread washes over him as he realizes Florina truly did forge a contract with the legendary spirit dragon. The massive dragon formally introduces itself as Livia and confirms its active contract with Florina. Looming powerfully over the ruined estate, Livia calmly states that it has already heard everything directly from its master. The dragon acknowledges Reynolds' tragic past, noting he was a gifted mage falsely accused and unjustly exiled from the royal capital. Livia explains that it fully understands how that severe trauma destroyed his ability to trust others and forced him to protect his own heart. Hovering in the blinding light, the dragon admits it can comprehend his defensive actions. Despite understanding his pain, Livia sternly reprimands him for failing to spare a single thought for Florina's delicate heart. The dragon gravely reveals that funneling the immense power of the spirits into a vessel born without magic or resistance is extremely dangerous. Livia explains that the overwhelming surge of magical power is far beyond the agony she endured during her narcolepsy. Continuing the grim warning, the dragon states that her body is being actively damaged before it can even react to the massive intake of energy. Reynolds' eyes widen in sheer horror as the dragon bluntly declares that continuing to use this power will inevitably cost Florina her life. Clenching his trembling fist, Reynolds acknowledges the undeniable truth that wielding power beyond human comprehension demands a fatal price. Staring up at the majestic spirit dragon, a devastated Reynolds whispers a desperate plea to understand why she would go to such fatal lengths. Questioning her reckless actions, a mysterious voice asks why she would take such a monumental risk and contract with all of the spirits. The ethereal entity gently reprimands him, asking if he truly still does not understand the depth of her devotion. Revealing the ultimate truth, the spirit bluntly states that she did all of this simply because he saved her life. Elaborating further, the voice explains that she wishes to repay her life debt because she deeply loves him and desperately wants to remain by his side. Lowering his head in utter self-deprecation, Reynolds bitterly argues that he possesses absolutely no value worth risking her life for. Tormented by his own harsh words, he painfully concludes that after saying such cruel things to her, she must have completely lost all affection for him. Rejecting his miserable assumptions, the magical entity challenges him to look and see the undeniable truth with his own two eyes. Startled by a sudden burst of brilliant magical energy, Reynolds throws his arm up to shield his face from the blinding light. As the light fades, an incredibly ornate, floating mirror fully materializes in the center of the room surrounded by glowing feathers. Recognizing the phenomenon, the astonished nobleman realizes she is effortlessly casting highest-tier spatial magic to project a distant location. Peering into the mystical glass, he watches in stunned silence as Florina fearlessly stands her ground to argue with a large crowd of villagers. An angry villager aggressively shouts at the young woman, viciously branding Reynolds as a traitor who sold their country to the Empire. Fueling the mob's fury, another man angrily accuses the exiled noble of leaking sensitive national information in exchange for massive sums of money. Gripped by fear and disgust, a woman in the crowd shudders and loudly complains that just knowing such a monster lives nearby makes her skin crawl. The paranoid villagers continue to hurl venomous accusations, convinced that he is secretly plotting to bring the entire kingdom down from his ruined estate. Reaching a fever pitch of hatred, the merciless crowd ultimately condemns Reynolds as a literal demon. Unfazed by their overwhelming hostility, Florina boldly interrupts their tirade and questions if all of this is simply based on baseless rumors. Completely taken aback by her unwavering confidence, the aggressive villagers freeze in stunned silence. Shifting the narrative, she reminds the bewildered crowd that their very own land was completely barren and unlivable until just 8 years ago. Pressing her advantage, she fiercely declares that it was Lord Reynolds, acting as Chancellor, who personally planned and executed the large-scale irrigation project that saved their livelihoods. Muttering amongst themselves, the shameful villagers awkwardly avert their eyes as they realize she knows the undeniable truth of their past salvation. Refusing to back down, the determined bride passionately brings up the devastating plague that swept through the kingdom exactly 6 years ago. She vigorously reminds them that it was Lord Reynolds who spent his own personal fortune to distribute aid to the poor and successfully dispatched healers to save countless lives. Softening her voice with profound gratitude, Florina intimately confesses that she once lived a miserable life being entirely scorned as a cursed child. Staring through the magical projection, Reynolds listens in total shock as she tearfully reveals that his kindness taught her it was finally okay to live in this world. Staking her entire existence on his honor, she proudly proclaims to the crowd that such a kind and exceptionally wise man would never betray their kingdom. Swayed by her passionate defense, the crowd begins to murmur in hesitant agreement while Reynolds watches his terrible reputation shatter before his very eyes. When a confused woman asks why she places so much absolute faith in a disgraced man, Florina responds with a radiant, unwavering smile. Bursting with blinding pride, the radiant girl cheerfully announces that she is his devoted wife and that it is her absolute duty to always trust and support her husband. Overwhelmed by the sheer purity of her love, the broken nobleman's heart trembles as he finally wonders if it is truly okay to believe in her feelings. Sitting quietly in the bright sunlight, Lord Reynolds bitterly wonders if it is truly acceptable for someone like him to continue living in this world. Gentle footsteps suddenly echo in the hallway as a familiar shadow slowly approaches his isolated location. Florina silently stands in the grand doorway, clutching a fresh basket of beautiful flowers. She cautiously peeks into the quiet room with a hesitant, deeply anxious expression. Hearing her sudden approach, Reynolds turns around in surprise as she steps fully into the light. Looking at her in pure disbelief, He notes that she actually came back despite all the cruel things he said to her previously. With tears glistening brightly in her eyes, a soft, immensely relieved smile spreads across her face. Brimming with absolute resolve, she fiercely declares that she will become his wife and firmly refuses to go home no matter what he says. Pausing for a tense moment, Reynolds admits that there was one important thing he completely forgot to tell her. Staring down at the empty table, he sincerely apologizes for aggressively discarding the rice porridge she went through so much trouble to make. Looking away with a rare hint of vulnerability, he softly asks if she would be willing to make it for him again. Overjoyed by the sudden request, Florina enthusiastically agrees without a single moment of hesitation. The dark night gracefully transitions into a bright morning as a small bird chirps cheerfully outside the estate window. Wrapped in comfortable sheets, Lord Reynolds rests deeply, finally enjoying a peaceful sleep after years of endless torment. Slowly opening his tired eyes, he sits up in his grand bed and quietly observes his sunlit room. Staring thoughtfully ahead, he recalls the incredibly unexpected visit from the energetic Duke's daughter yesterday. He quietly muses that such a remarkably wise and gentle person would undoubtedly never betray their country. Closing his eyes, he lets out a soft, thoroughly relaxed sigh. He silently wonders just how many long years have passed since he last experienced such profound tranquility. Realizing he woke up feeling completely calm for the first time in forever, he confidently reaches out to open his bedroom door. Throwing the heavy doors open, a radiantly smiling Florina cheerfully bids him a good morning while dressed in stunning white. Reynolds immediately recoils, a look of sheer, panicked shock entirely overtaking his face. Flustered and completely bewildered, he frantically demands to know why on earth she is wearing a full wedding dress. Blushing brightly, she shyly hides her face and happily points out that he essentially proposed to her yesterday. Rubbing his neck in absolute confusion, he blankly asks what on earth she could possibly be talking about. She eagerly leans forward and reminds him that he explicitly asked her to make him rice porridge again. Her eyes sparkling with overwhelming confidence, she wildly deduces that wanting her cooking every day obviously means he wants to marry her. While Reynolds stands completely dumbfounded by her massive leap in logic, she happily celebrates having the foresight to bring her wedding dress from home. Glancing over his shoulder, he calmly reflects that his ultimate answer to her had already been decided from the very start. With a soft, slightly exasperated expression, he turns back to look at the hopelessly energetic girl standing before him. Descending the grand staircase, Reynolds firmly permits her to stay at the mansion but bluntly refuses to marry her. He coldly advises the Duke's daughter to return to the royal capital where she can find plenty of suitable men. Florina cups her face with a radiant smile and stubbornly refuses, declaring she only wants Lord Reynolds. Annoyed by her persistence, he bluntly reminds her that a marriage requires his consent and orders her to give up. His heavy footsteps echo down the corridor as he walks away, leaving her standing alone in the grand hall. Dropping her head slightly, Florina logically concedes that his stubborn argument is completely reasonable. A massive shadow suddenly falls over the entryway as a pair of dark, magical wings materializes nearby. The towering silhouette of the spirit dragon looms silently behind her to observe the romantic stalemate. Turning with teary eyes, she playfully whines to Livia about her beloved's extreme cruelty. Livia logically points out that a marriage contract undeniably requires the mutual consent of both parties. Bouncing back with fierce determination, Florina enthusiastically declares she will prove her usefulness and close in on his heart from the outside. Staring up at the dragon, she boldly accepts the challenge and solidifies her new offensive strategy. She cheerfully proclaims that the ultimate strategy to capture a man's heart is to start with his stomach. A deeply bewildered Reynolds breaks into a cold sweat and asks if she is trying to start a grand banquet. He sits completely paralyzed in front of an absurdly massive feast while Florina beams proudly from across the table. Surrounded by helpful spirits, she giggles nervously and playfully admits she might have cooked a little too much. She dramatically clutches her cheeks and insists the feast was made purely out of love, causing Reynolds to groan internally. Staring at the mountain of food, he mentally laments that his starved body cannot possibly handle such a sudden massive meal. Hesitantly lifting a spoon to his mouth, the exhausted mage takes a tiny, cautious bite of the food. His eyes widen in genuine shock as he softly admits that the meal is actually incredibly delicious. Overjoyed by his praise, Florina erupts into a sparkling frenzy of pure, unadulterated happiness. She modestly credits the spirits for the amazing taste, prompting a curious Reynold to ask where she found so many ingredients. Beaming brightly, she explains that the adorable green spirits generously provided all the fresh vegetables. Reynold recoils in sheer horror as she cheerfully adds that the beast spirits happily provided the meat. He sits frozen in absolute disbelief at the sheer absurdity of using mythological spiritual power for simple cooking. Holding up a little spirit, Florina cheerfully laughs and agrees that this power is truly enough to rule the world. Cleaning up the kitchen later, she affectionately reasons that his weakened body simply couldn't handle a heavy meal yet. Determined to push forward, she ponders her next strategy by wondering what else could be troubling her beloved. Livia's voice abruptly breaks her concentration to point out how completely different the young mage looks today. Florina warmly smiles at his newly groomed beard and hair, admitting to herself that his previous gloomy appearance also possessed its own unique charm. Struck by a sudden realization, the bright-eyed girl excitedly points her finger and declares that she has finally figured out the missing piece. Looking at her with mild confusion, the exhausted nobleman quietly prompts her to continue her thought. Florina explains that the frightened villagers explicitly mentioned the ruined mansion looked far too terrifying and unapproachable. Gathering her immense magical energy, the determined bride leaps into the air and summons a glowing array of light beneath her feet. Brimming with cheerful optimism, she declares that cleaning up the imposing estate will definitely make it much easier for guests to visit. Unleashing a blinding wave of magical energy, she confidently proclaims that a welcoming home will finally help everyone understand Lord Reynold's true charm. A magnificent burst of radiant magic erupts from the very foundations of the isolated estate. Brows furrowing in sudden confusion, Reynold turns toward the library window as an unnatural light begins to flood the room. A tremendous shockwave violently blasts through the glass, throwing the startled nobleman backward as he throws his arms up to shield his face. Struggling against the overwhelming pressure, he stares in absolute disbelief at the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the magic power currently shaking the estate. A dreadful realization suddenly dawns on him as he quickly steps forward to confront the source of the magical anomaly. Bursting out into the open courtyard, Reynold stops dead in his tracks and gasps in pure shock. Floating gently above the roof, a beaming Florina cheerfully calls out her beloved lord's name. The once gloomy, terrifying mansion has been completely transformed into a blindingly cute palace adorned with giant heart-shaped windows, blooming roses, and fluttering doves. Clasping her hands together with a radiant smile, the proud bride cheerfully asks how he likes the new look, assuring him that absolutely no one will be afraid of him now. Utterly paralyzed by the aggressively adorable transformation, Reynold stares blankly at what used to be his solemn estate. Clenching his trembling fist, the deeply exasperated noble desperately reminds himself that she truly meant no harm with this ridiculous display. Dropping his head in utter defeat, he mentally reaches out to the ancient spirit dragon for an explanation. The ethereal entity telepathically informs him that unlike standard magic, spirit power is heavily influenced by the user's current mental state. The dragon wryly notes that Florina's overwhelmingly intense love for him is the exact reason the magic manifested in such a blindingly affectionate form. Pinching the bridge of his nose, the exhausted lord bluntly orders her to put his house exactly back the way it was. Dejected by his completely unenthusiastic reaction, she reluctantly asks the spirits to revert the changes but suddenly loses her footing midair. His eyes widening in sudden panic, Reynold screams her name as gravity takes hold of the exhausted girl. Stripped of her magical support, Florina plummets helplessly toward the unforgiving stone courtyard below. Utilizing his own lightning-fast magic, the desperate nobleman dashes forward and perfectly catches the falling bride in his arms. Holding her tightly against his chest, he frantically inspects her for injuries and demands to know if she foolishly drained all her strength by overusing her immense power. Caught completely off guard by his sudden physical closeness, a blushing Florina stammers nervously as her heart begins to race. Time seems to completely freeze as the two stare deeply into each other's eyes, their rapidly beating hearts echoing loudly in the quiet courtyard. The intense, romantic tension is instantly shattered when a young girl's voice loudly screams out for her big sister. Startled out of their intimate moment, the flustered couple quickly jumps apart as a little girl with twin tails fiercely charges toward them. Looking up with wide, teary eyes, the little girl stammers in sudden recognition. Lord Reynold identifies the child as Mimi from the village they visited yesterday as she excitedly runs toward Florina. Kneeling down with a warm smile, Florina gently welcomes the young girl and asks how she can help her. Clutching a small bundle in her arms, Mimi innocently asks if the beautiful older sister is going to marry the great mage. Florina cheerfully confirms the marriage with a bright smile, completely ignoring Reynold as he angrily shouts a denial in the background. Staring blankly at the exasperated lord, the little girl bluntly asks if he is the husband, prompting another tired denial from the brooding man. Desperation suddenly fills the child's eyes as she looks up at the mage and begs for his assistance. Tears streaming down her face, Mimi desperately pleads with Lord Reynold to save her precious friend, Ari. Gripping her bundle tightly, she tearfully explains that the pet they keep at home has not been well at all. Florina looks down with deep concern at the extremely weak and sick bird resting in the girl's arms. Crying out in fear, Mimi begs for magic to cure her friend because the villagers are saying Ari is going to pass away. Hoping for a miracle, Florina turns toward Lord Reynold with a worried, pleading expression. Refusing to offer false hope, the cynical lord coldly states that life always comes to an end and bluntly tells the child to give up. Devastated by the harsh truth, Mimi hugs her bird closer as tears drip down her face and she whispers a weak denial. Completely breaking down, the young girl wails in pure agony, screaming that she absolutely does not want Ari to die. While a panicked Florina frantically tries to comfort the sobbing child, Reynold averts his gaze in troubled silence. Refusing to accept this tragedy, Florina suddenly stands up with fierce determination as her magical companions float behind her. Staring intensely ahead, she urgently realizes that she absolutely has to do something to intervene. Channeling her energy, she desperately calls out to her spirits and begs them to lend her their immense power. Just as she prepares to cast, she gasps in shock as a stern voice abruptly commands her to stop. Turning around in panicked confusion, Florina demands to know why Livia is stopping her when they desperately need to save the bird. The shadowy spirit firmly warns that since her contract is recent, she lacks the delicate control required to handle power that acts like destructive floods and storms. Livia severely explains that wielding such overwhelming magic crudely will completely crush a creature so incredibly small. Staring down at her master, the spirit reminds Florina that as someone born without innate magic, she should understand this biological limitation perfectly well. Struck by the harsh reality, the young woman winces in frustrated defeat. Refusing to surrender, she clenches her fists and insists there must still be some way she can help without relying on raw spirit power. A sudden spark of inspiration hits her as she frantically suggests using medicinal herbs to cure the illness. Looking closely at the dying creature, she realizes with horror that the fragile bird no longer has the physical strength to swallow medicine. Agonizing over her profound helplessness, she desperately racks her brain for a solution that does not require overwhelming magical force. As a heavy door creaks open behind them, a gentle voice softly breaks the tension and tells the sobbing child not to cry. A soft gasp of confusion breaks the silence as a startling realization abruptly dawns upon her. The once lifeless little bird miraculously begins to glow with magical energy as its delicate wings flutter with new life. Radiating a brilliant and sparkling light, the tiny creature happily takes flight into the glowing air. Overwhelmed with absolute disbelief, the young girl tearfully cries out the name of her beloved pet Ari. Speaking directly to her heart, the magical bird gently expresses its profound gratitude before explaining that it must return to the sky. Desperate to hold onto her precious friend, little Mimi fiercely begs the bird to stay by her side forever. Florina watches in empathetic sorrow as the glowing bird gently ascends away from the desperately reaching child. Tears stream uncontrollably down Mimi's face as she chokes out a heartbreaking apology to her departing companion. The fading spirit affectionately reassures Mimi that the time they spent together brought it unparalleled happiness. Promising to always watch over her from above, the bird lovingly reminds the weeping girl that her bright smile was its greatest treasure. The gentle voice softly promises that as long as Mimi keeps smiling bravely, it will never feel lonely in the heavens. Sniffling through her tears, the little girl earnestly asks if smiling will truly keep her beloved Ari happy. A warm and comforting whisper echoes from above, confirming with absolute certainty that her smile means everything. Clenching her little fists into her dress, the young girl bravely struggles to swallow her overwhelming grief. With fierce determination, she vigorously scrubs the heavy tears from her eyes to force away her sorrow. Forcing a bright and watery smile, Mimi courageously promises that she will not shed another tear. A final tender exchange of eternal love and gratitude beautifully echoes as the glowing spirit completely vanishes. Meanwhile, A gentle hand respectfully caresses the physical, lifeless body of the little bird that remains behind. Sitting quietly on a serene balcony, Reynold reflects deeply on the profound peace that finally graced the little girl's smiling face. The cool mountain breeze drifts softly over the brooding Mage as he silently contemplates the emotional miracle he just witnessed. Breaking the tranquil silence, a gentle voice from behind expresses profound and sincere gratitude for his actions. Florina stands politely in the grand doorway, her eyes reflecting deep admiration for the man staring out at the scenery. Florina warmly notes that the child's heart was genuinely saved, even as Reynold humbly reminds her that the magical farewell was merely an illusion spell. Beaming with absolute pride, Florina enthusiastically praises her beloved for his incredible kindness and flawless magical execution. Dropping her gaze slightly, she confesses her own feelings of inadequacy and heavily laments being entirely useless without the spirit's power. Reynold admits that seeing her desperate empathy for the grieving child inspired him to intervene and lessen the inescapable sorrow of death. Turning to face her completely, the handsome Mage openly confesses that her pure heart was the sole reason he was moved to act. He solemnly praises her unwavering compassion, noting that without her presence, little Mimi would still be consumed by endless despair. Tightening his grip on the balcony chair, the stoic Mage softly begins to admit a deeply personal truth that he has kept completely hidden. Offering her a breathtakingly warm smile, Reynold reveals that her radiant light completely saved him from wandering endlessly in his own bleak darkness. Looking at her crying face, Lord Reynold softly assures the young bride that she is not useless at all. Sniffling to hold back her tears, Florina wipes her eyes on the balcony while he watches her quietly. Breaking the heavy tension, the nobleman gently suggests that they should go inside and have dinner now. With a tearful but genuinely radiant smile, the devoted girl happily agrees to his kind suggestion. After their meal, Reynold strictly orders her to revert the mansion's blindingly cute makeover because he actually preferred its original, terrifying state. Meanwhile, down in the village plaza, a young boy excitedly announces that his favorite big sister has arrived for another visit. Stepping into the bustling market, the cheerful bride makes her grand entrance as the locals quickly notice her presence. The eager villagers immediately crowd around the magical girl, welcoming her warmly into their community. Surrounded by curious onlookers, Florina carefully administers a magical treatment to an elderly woman sitting on a stool. Stretching her arms wide, the old lady joyfully declares that the agonizing pain in her back has completely disappeared. A grateful villager explains that possessing any healing magic is incredibly rare in these parts, thanking the young Mage profusely for her free assistance. Brimming with absolute pride, Florina happily claims that her incredible abilities are entirely the result of Lord Reynold's excellent guidance. While the villagers apologize for constantly relying on her charity, she internally apologizes to her spirits for keeping their immense power a secret. Flashing a brilliant smile, the loyal bride confidently lies to the crowd, stating that healing them is Lord Reynold's direct instruction. She guiltily admits in her mind that he never actually gave that order, reasoning that he generally told her to just be kind. Her internal monologue is suddenly interrupted when her invisible spirit companion sharply calls out to her. The haughty entity demands to know why Florina lied about the disgraced nobleman's instructions, noting that ordinary humans cannot even perceive her own existence. Unfazed by the scolding, the determined girl explains that spreading good rumors is the fastest way to clear her husband's misunderstood reputation among the doubting locals. The spirit sarcastically praises her admirable devotion before Florina admits there is another, far more selfish motive behind her actions. Blushing furiously, she imagines holding hands with Reynold and confesses her ultimate goal is to make the village friendly enough for romantic shopping dates. Changing the subject to more pressing matters, she turns to a nearby man and asks if the village chief is around today. The young villager scratches his head and informs her that the chief actually left town early this morning. Looking nervously at the ground, another local mutters that he hopes the chief's important errand goes well. Sensing the sudden drop in morale, a concerned Florina quickly asks if something terrible has happened recently. Pausing hesitantly, the worried villager finally decides to share the grim reality of their current predicament. With a heavy sigh, he reveals that the region's crucial water supply has mysteriously dried up completely. He explains that the river levels plummeted a month ago, leaving the entire village absolutely terrified about losing their drinking water. Back at the Grand Estate, Florina asks Reynold how a frontier rich in snowmelt could possibly be suffering from severe water depletion. Pulling a heavy book from the library shelf, the knowledgeable nobleman calmly deduces that a massive slime infestation is the most likely cause. Staring at his back in utter bewilderment, the young bride questions how simple slimes could create such a devastating drought. Lord Reynold deduces that the area is a slime breeding ground and explains that the local rivers connect directly to the northern Vilru mountain range's water source. He further explains that an ecological balance is usually maintained by vestigia, natural predators that actively hunt the slimes. Noting the unusually cold summer, he points out that vestigia are monsters inherently weak to cold weather. He concludes that because the predators entered early hibernation to avoid the chill, the slimes likely multiplied rapidly and physically blocked the river. Gazing at him in pure admiration, Florina enthusiastically praises Lord Reynold for his incredible deductive skills. Startled by her sudden exclamation, Reynold flinches violently while holding a book as Florina gasps in sudden realization. She urgently recalls that the villagers mentioned their chief heading into the mountains to investigate the water source, warning that swarming slimes pose a massive danger. Attempting to calm the situation, Reynold clarifies that slimes are scavengers that eat corpses, fish, and insects, but rarely attack humans. Florina stares anxiously at him, prompting him to hesitate with a troubled expression as he mutters a quiet objection. Turning his back completely, he bitterly murmurs that his presence would not make a difference even if he went. Staring dejectedly at the massive bookshelf, he cynically predicts that the villagers will surely resent his intervention regardless of his intentions. A heavy silence falls over the grand library as the weight of his bitter words lingers. Looking at him with deep sympathy, Florina softly whispers his name as she intimately understands his enduring pain. She silently reflects that it is completely natural for him to feel so pessimistic after enduring 5 whole years of being terribly misunderstood by society. Clenching her fist with fiery determination, she aggressively prepares to take matters into her own hands. Radiating absolute confidence, Florina cheerfully announces that she will personally go and defeat the swarming slimes. Lord Reynold spins around in absolute shock, frantically asking what she could possibly accomplish all by herself. Smiling warmly with magical energy swirling around her, she proudly assures him that she won't be fighting alone. Stepping forward with incredible grace, a brilliant magical aura blooms beneath her boots as she activates her power. Throwing her arm forward, she confidently calls out to her shadowy spirit companion, Luvia. Reynold stumbles back in sheer disbelief as a massive, dark-winged creature materializes, asking in shock if it is a legendary spirit dragon. The colossal shadowy entity rapidly gathers its dark energy into a dense, swirling mass in the sky. A blinding, intense light violently erupts from the center of the concentrated dark mass. Desperately shielding his eyes from the overwhelming glare, Reynold screams in terror at the unbelievable amount of raw magic power radiating through the room. A piercing, fiercely glowing eye suddenly snaps open from within the blinding magical light. A powerful, resonant voice echoes through the hall, stating that it has been quite a long time since it last assumed this majestic form. Reynold stares up in absolute awe, murmuring that this incredible spirit dragon is actually Luvia's true form. Completely unfazed by the monstrous power, Florina cheerfully explains that Luvia's massive size will allow them to reach the endangered village chief right away. Staring forward with unwavering resolve, she silently plots that solving the village's severe water depletion problem will be the perfect opportunity. Kicking off the floor with tremendous force, she boldly launches herself into action to save the day. Riding confidently on the majestic dragon's back, Florina cheerfully predicts that their efforts will inevitably lessen Lord Reynold's notorious reputation across the entire frontier. Smiling brightly as she soars through the sky, she warmly expresses her earnest desire to finally be of help to someone else in need. She firmly dedicates her mission to her beloved, hoping to save others exactly like Lord Reynold saved her from her tragic fate. Waving back enthusiastically from the heavens, she happily promises her bewildered husband that she will return safely before dinner. Panicking at her sudden departure, Reynold sprints desperately toward the balcony while frantically demanding that she wait. His desperate plea falls on deaf ears as the massive mythical beast forcefully launches into the clouds and leaves him far behind. The breathless mage gazes helplessly up into the vast, empty sky as a deep sense of dread washes over him. Gripped by overwhelming concern for her fragile vessel, he silently prays that Florina will not push herself past her absolute limits. The narrative shifts to a heavy memory where the dragon gravely warns the young woman about the fatal consequences of drawing upon too much of their immense power. Despite being warned about the severe toll on her frail human body, Florina firmly acknowledges the deadly risk without a single trace of hesitation. Her eyes sparkle with unyielding resolve as she boldly declares that there is an ultimate goal she absolutely must accomplish regardless of the cost. The ancient dragon solemnly reminds her of the fateful conversation they shared on the very day they forged their extraordinary contract. Luvia's massive, imposing visage stares intently into her soul as it silently evaluates the sheer weight of her human determination. Looming powerfully in the ruined hall, the mythical entity demands to know exactly what incredible feat she intends to accomplish using its legendary power. Testing her moral boundaries, the terrifying beast playfully but ominously wonders if she desires to bring about the absolute destruction of the entire world. Instead of showing fear, Florina gazes up with a breathtakingly gentle smile and tearful eyes as she prepares to reveal her purest ambition. Snapping back to the present, Luvia fondly reflects that her beautifully selfless answer was the sole reason it agreed to bind its fate to hers. The majestic flight is violently interrupted as a terrifying scream suddenly echoes from the dense forest below. Whipping her head around in absolute alarm, Florina immediately recognizes the distressed voice and urgently calls out to Luvia. The great dragon instantly confirms her suspicion and prepares to dive directly toward the source of the frantic commotion. Florina's eye widens in sheer panic as she zeroes in on a disturbing scene unfolding on the forest floor below. An unconscious, older man lies completely motionless on the grassy ground while being swarmed by a massive group of adorable, blob-like green spirits. The overhead view reveals the helpless man hopelessly surrounded by the bouncing magical creatures near the base of a giant tree. Realizing the immediate danger, Florina forcefully commands the green spirits to halt their magical mischief. A tiny green blob squeaks innocently in response, completely unaware of the escalating crisis it has accidentally caused. Thrusting her hand forward with fierce determination, she channels a massive surge of magic to forcefully intervene in the chaotic situation. The bouncing little creatures stare back in utterly adorable confusion as the magical atmosphere suddenly shifts around them. Without warning, violently thick wooden roots suddenly erupt from the earth and viciously entangle the helpless man. Recognizing the battered victim, Florina cries out in shock as she identifies the trapped man as the local village chief. She urgently throws herself to his side and grabs his arm, frantically begging the fading chief to stay with her. Looking down at the injured man, Luvia notes that he is thankfully only unconscious. A large swarm of slimes trembles in the forest clearing near Luvia and the massive spirit dragon. Turning her attention to the creeping threat, Luvia calmly suggests they take care of the monsters now. The small gelatinous creatures bounce forward while emitting strange squelching noises. Several slimes begin to shift and stack together with bubbly sounds. While Luvia shields the unconscious man, the surrounding slimes rapidly merge into a single massive entity. A towering, terrifying slime monster with glowing eyes fully materializes before them. Assessing the massive beast, the spirit dragon remarks that this particular enemy will be a bit troublesome. He explains that it is a grand slime, a rare monster born from thousands of lesser slimes gathering together. He further warns Luvia that physical attacks are completely useless against its gelatinous body. Reacting instantly to a sudden attack, Luvia leaps backward through the air as debris shatters around her. The dragon cautions that the creature's entire surface is coated in a highly corrosive acid. He emphasizes that even the slightest touch will inflict severe, unavoidable burns. Sweating but resolute, Luvia firmly declares that she will have to use her special power to resolve this. Enraged by her decision, the dragon violently stomps his clawed foot and screams at Florina to stop immediately. He demands to know what will happen to her fragile body, insisting that his own spirit magic is more than enough to crush a grand slime. When the dragon argues that she shouldn't risk herself for that brat's sake, Luvia furiously shouts back that his method simply will not work. Staring down the giant beast, she admits that while the spirit's power could easily destroy the monster, simply destroying the creature would cause all the dammed-up river water behind it to violently rush out at once. She frantically explains that the resulting flash flood would completely sweep away all the nearby villages. With tears welling in her eyes, Luvia gently reminds the stubborn dragon that she had already explained this to him earlier. She passionately declares that she wants to protect someone else, just as Lord Reynold had selflessly saved her. She insists that her unique magic is absolutely necessary to instantly evaporate both the monster and the accumulated floodwaters simultaneously. In a moment of desperation, A loud plea echoes out to reconsider the dangerous plan. The great spirit dragon stares down at the determined young mage in a long, stunned silence. Finally relenting to her unwavering resolve, the dragon agrees, bringing a brilliant, tearful smile to Livia's face. Bracing herself for the immense magical toll, Livia confidently announces that she is ready to cast. A magnificent, blinding aura of magical energy erupts around Livia and the spectral dragon as they synchronize their power. Refusing to let them charge their spell, the grand slime violently lunges forward. The massive monster throws a devastating, acidic punch directly toward the glowing mage. Clasping her hands tightly against her chest, she gathers her resolve in the face of imminent danger. With unwavering focus, she whispers a powerful command to manifest her magic. Extending her hand, she unleashes a radiant magic circle directly at the grotesque slime monster. Suddenly, a dense and swirling vortex of dark energy ominously erupts in the sky above the battlefield. She fiercely summons the Celestia Gladius, the legendary sword of the spirit dragon. Floating gracefully amid a shower of glowing feathers, she channels the divine energy flowing into her. A colossal pillar of blinding light violently crashes down upon the dense forest below. Watching from afar, he gasps in sheer disbelief at the impossibly massive magical power radiating from the strike. He dreads the terrible realization that wielding such overwhelming force will eventually cost her life. As an ominous vision of her demise flashes through his mind, he desperately cries out Florina's name. Standing bravely before the massive slime, she hears her draconic companion ask if she is truly certain about taking this dangerous path. She firmly confirms that using this ultimate power is the only way to defeat the monster and save the village from a catastrophic flood. Deep down, her true motivation is to be as brave and selfless as Lord Reynolds. She declares with burning passion that she wants to become someone capable of protecting and helping others. The mighty dragon roars its agreement as she enthusiastically commands Livia to charge into battle. Propelled by ethereal wings, she dashes forward with blinding speed. Reaching her hand out fiercely, she prepares to unleash the full extent of her latent power. She loudly commands the ultimate holy weapon to manifest itself in the physical realm. In a dazzling burst of light, the legendary spirit dragon's sword materializes firmly in her grasp. Legend states that long ago, a saint contracted with the spirit dragon used this very sword to defeat powerful monsters and bring peace to a terrified world. Tragically, human conflicts erupted over the saint's power, causing the grieving hero to entrust her sword to the dragon before vanishing forever. Now, that ancient and sorrowful blade gleams brightly once more in the hands of a new protector. The sword hums with an intense, resonating energy as she tightens her grip on the ornate hilt. Channeling the holy relic, she commands all the spirits to answer to their true names and assume their ultimate forms. In an instant, the majestic forms of Garuda, Undine, and Sylph Cherubim materialize in a flash of brilliant light. They are swiftly joined by the earth-shaking gnome and the fierce Venus Fenrir, completely surrounding her with divine magic. Standing proudly at the epicenter of this miraculous gathering, she holds the glowing sword high amidst her celestial army. Quickly assessing the battlefield, she orders Fenrir to rescue the village chief and carry him to absolute safety. Turning her blazing eyes toward the encroaching disaster, she prepares her next command for the remaining elemental guardians. She desperately orders the other spirits to erect a massive barrier to ensure the destructive flooding does not spread any further. Gliding rapidly through the air, the majestic dragon and a fierce bear-like spirit descend toward the chaotic battlefield. The massive creatures dive aggressively through the turbulent wind. Flapping its enormous wings, the dragon continues its steep descent toward the earth below. Slicing through the air, the ethereal dragon telepathically commands Florina to listen to its grave instructions. The beast warns that while the divine sword unleashes tremendous magical power, her mortal body cannot endure the strain for much longer. Channeling radiant energy into the blade, the dragon orders her to finish the fight in a single, decisive strike. Charging forward with fierce determination, Florina yells out that she understands the high stakes. Leaping fearlessly into the sky, she readies her glowing blade against the colossal and menacing grand slime. The gigantic gelatinous monster glares back, preparing to absorb the devastating impact. Blood suddenly bursts from her arm as the overwhelming magical energy violently overloads her fragile body. Screaming with raw exertion, she unleashes a blinding, thunderous slash directly onto the monstrous creature. A massive pillar of radiant light erupts into the heavens, completely engulfing the battlefield in absolute brightness. Exhausted but resolute, her boots gently touch back down onto the grassy earth. The sheer force of her magical strike shatters the surrounding terrain into thousands of flying pieces. Panting heavily while leaning on her sword, she notes with relief that the Grand Slime is finally defeated. However, her relief vanishes into horror as she watches the massive, surging wall of water refuse to stop flowing. Gripping the hilt of her sword with trembling hands, she desperately resolves to strike the raging torrent one more time. Suddenly, her eyes go wide as dark blood violently spills past her lips. Coughing up a horrific amount of blood, she clutches her chest as her internal organs begin to fail. The dragon screams her name in absolute panic as she collapses face first into the dirt amidst a burst of failing magic. The beast sadly realizes that using such raw power without magical resistance caused her body to violently reject it, fading her consciousness into agonizing pain. Her vision rapidly blurs as she fights a losing battle to keep her eyes open. Desperately reaching her bloodied hand toward her fallen sword, she cries out that she still has a mission to complete. Her spirit companions watch helplessly as a chaotic swirl of magical backlash surrounds her trembling form. Suddenly, the tiny animal spirits gasp in pure shock as they detect a new, incoming disaster. A colossal explosion of untamed water violently erupts from the forest canopy. The devastating flood crashes through the massive trees, splintering wood and tearing up the landscape. Rushing with terrifying speed, the torrent completely obliterates everything standing in its destructive path. Staring toward the raging floodwaters, Florina screams out in unadulterated terror. Forcing herself to endure the agony, she cries out that Mimi's village lies directly in the path of the incoming tsunami. Startled by a sudden noise, someone nervously asks what that terrifying sound could be. A massive flood of rushing water violently crashes through the forest, snapping massive trees like fragile twigs. Panicking as the river breaches its banks, the terrified villagers scream for everyone to run for their lives. Amidst the chaotic roar of the advancing flood, a desperate voice cries out for someone to help. A terrified father clutches his young daughter tightly to his chest while shouting to hurry as the floodwaters close in on them. Racing against time, the majestic spirit dragon swoops down from the sky with Livia riding securely on its back. Assessing the catastrophic force of the floodwaters, Livia realizes that even erecting wooden walls with the spirit's power won't be enough to stop it. She quickly deduces that evaporating the water with flames is not a viable option because it would severely damage the surrounding area. Desperation sets in as Livia frantically wonders if there is any safe method left to halt the raging waters. Suddenly, a monstrous, ear-piercing roar violently shatters the tense sky. Looking up in horror, Livia watches as a massive swarm of terrifying winged dragons descends upon the valley. Recognizing their gigantic wings and lizard-like forms, she identifies the beasts as the dangerous Vestidra that Lord Reynold had previously mentioned. She realizes the creatures should still be hibernating but were likely awakened prematurely by the immense power of the sword earlier. Refusing to let the village be destroyed, Livia steels her resolve and declares she has to do something immediately. Overwhelming magic recoils violently within her fragile body, causing Livia to forcefully cough up a massive spray of blood. Bleeding heavily from her mouth and covered in severe injuries, her consciousness fades as she begins to collapse. The panicked spirit dragon screams Florina's name as her limp, battered body plummets helplessly through the open sky. Just before tragedy strikes, a dark boot steps firmly onto a glowing magical teleportation circle midair. Appearing seemingly out of nowhere, Lord Reynold materializes in the sky and safely catches Livia's unconscious body in his arms. Battered and completely exhausted, Livia rests limply against his chest as she lets out a faint, pained gasp. Holding her securely, Reynold looks down with a distressed expression and gently apologizes for arriving so late. He grimly observes that her entire delicate body is mercilessly covered in severe wounds. Turning his attention to the great beast, he notes that her magical vessel was damaged because the enormous magic power forcibly overflowed. With a dark, intense glare, Reynold addresses the spirit dragon and demands an immediate explanation regarding Livia's catastrophic condition. He furiously questions why the powerful entity didn't stop her when it absolutely knew this tragedy would happen. The dragon remorsefully explains that it desperately wanted to stop her but could not defy Florina because she is its master contractor. Lowering its massive head in sorrow, the spirit admits it was bound to obey even knowing the magicless child would be gravely hurt. Staring at Livia's bruised face, the dragon solemnly declares that granting the contractor's wish is their inescapable fate. Kneeling safely under the shade of a tree, Reynold tenderly kisses her forehead and quietly reflects on Florina's selfless wish. A profound realization washes over him as he understands she sacrificed her own body to solve the water crisis just to lessen his bad reputation. Staring down in absolute distress, his face contorts with deep agonizing worry as he processes the horrific scene before him. Gently and with immense care, a trembling hand reaches out to softly stroke her feather-covered head. Weakly opening her eyes, Florina breathlessly murmurs Lord Reynold's name into the quiet air. Unable to hold back his intense emotions, he tightly grips her delicate hand to ground her to reality. Despite her severe injuries, she selflessly begs him to help the villagers first and insists that she is completely fine. Holding her battered body, he notes with deep anguish that she is still agonizing over the safety of others. Desperation bleeds into his voice as he demands to know why she would ever go so dangerously far for anyone else. She smiles gently through the pain, explaining that her unyielding bravery comes from watching him save so many people. Reynold immediately denies her praise, insisting that his past actions were nothing more than carrying out his strict duties as Chancellor. Overwhelmed by his own perceived failures, he bows his head as heavy guilt threatens to shatter his composure. Looking up at him with unwavering admiration, she firmly declares that he is a truly wonderful and great mage. She continues with absolute certainty, vowing that Lord Reynold has always been and will always remain her ultimate hero. Tears stream down his face as he covers his mouth, completely moved by her pure and unconditional faith in him. Breaking the emotional silence, she softly confesses that she is actually far more selfish than he could ever imagine. With fierce determination burning in her eyes, she vows that she will absolutely never allow anyone to die in front of her again. Suddenly, a massive surge of water and debris violently crashes nearby, signaling an immediate and deadly threat. Panic erupts among the fleeing villagers as they realize the raging current is far too fast for them to escape in time. Refusing to let tragedy strike, Reynold steps forward and begins a powerful incantation, calling upon the raiment of deep snow. Channeling immense magical energy, he commands the breath of absolute zero to construct an unbreakable cage of extreme ice. With cold precision, he unleashes his devastating spell by whispering the final, chilling trigger to freeze the disaster entirely. A colossal, jagged glacier violently erupts from the ground, instantly intercepting the massive flood. The immense magical ice rapidly expands across the entire village, freezing the chaotic disaster in its tracks. The terrified villagers stare in absolute awe, struggling to comprehend that the raging floodwaters have been instantly turned into solid ice. A bewildered man gazes at the frozen miracle, asking aloud what on earth could have possibly caused this unbelievable phenomenon. Heavy boots crunch against the freshly frozen ground as the mysterious savior confidently steps into view. The crowd falls silent, their eyes locked onto the tall figure stepping out from the chilling mist. Recognizing the girl in his arms, the villagers begin whispering that the man carrying Florina must be from the mansion. Eyes widen in shock as someone in the crowd finally recognizes the powerful mage and calls out Lord Reynold's name. Reynold gazes silently at the astonished crowd, absorbing their collective gasps of disbelief. Standing tall and casting aside his past shadows, he firmly announces his true identity to the saved village. Looking at the calm waters, a voice reassures everyone that there is no longer any need to worry about the devastating flood. The soothing voice continues to explain that the raging river will soon completely return to its normal, peaceful water level. To add to the immense relief, it is joyfully confirmed that the village chief who ventured into the dangerous mountains is entirely safe as well. The gathered villagers erupt in absolute astonishment as they realize that Florina's unbelievable story was completely true all along. Throwing their hands up in pure jubilation, the crowd loudly cheers that Lord Reynold is the hero who saved their entire village. Smiling warmly at one another, the amazed villagers enthusiastically agree that the magical display they just witnessed was truly incredible. Suddenly, the joyful atmosphere is interrupted by the frantic sound of tiny, hurried footsteps sprinting across the cobblestones. Caught completely off guard, an utterly bewildered Lord Reynold gasps as a small child suddenly collides with his legs. Hugging him with all her might, little Mimi looks up with a brilliant smile and deeply thanks her big brother for protecting her and the village. Blushing slightly and looking away in modest embarrassment, the imposing Lord Reynold gently stammers that it was really nothing at all. Watching the heartwarming interaction unfold, Florina smiles radiantly as the gentle breeze softly blows through her long, beautiful hair. Drawn by her radiant presence, Reynolds' eyes widen slightly as he completely captivates himself in her remarkably warm and joyful expression. Standing together in the festive snow with Mimi still clinging to his hand, the two deeply share a tender, unspoken moment of mutual admiration. Meanwhile, a messenger bird glides swiftly over the sprawling, snow-covered landscape toward a massive, heavily fortified city. High above the bustling streets, the magnificent Griffiths Castle stands proudly in the heart of the royal capital. Inside the austere castle walls, a Sirius official formally reports that severe flooding had also occurred due to the terrifying monster's influence. An intrigued noble excitedly interrupts the official, noting that while the monster was defeated and the flooding subsided, there is a shocking detail regarding who stopped the damage. The official grimly confirms that the name Reynolds boldly appears on the report, referring to the infamous traitor who was exiled from the capital 3 years ago. The baffled nobles aggressively question why a man who was supposed to be reduced to a miserable shell shut in his mansion is suddenly out saving villages. Overhearing the shocking revelation, an elegantly dressed woman gasps Lord Reynolds' name with a deeply conflicted expression of utter disbelief. Far away from the tense capital, the frontier village excitedly celebrates their salvation with joyful families building snowmen in the brightly decorated streets. A breathtaking, towering evergreen tree magnificently decorated with glowing lights stands as the proud centerpiece of the bustling, snowy town square. Surrounded by eager onlookers, a gentle Lord Reynolds effortlessly channels his magical energy into a dazzling sphere of light resting in his palm. With a graceful toss, his magic powerfully ignites the massive festival tree, bathing the entire awestruck crowd in a warm, brilliant glow. Standing shoulder to shoulder, Florina gleefully praises the spectacular sight while a softly smiling Reynolds agrees that the brilliant display is quite beautiful. Thoroughly impressed by the magical light show, the ecstatic villagers loudly cheer that such a magnificent feat is exactly what they expected of Master Reynolds. Laughing heartily with overflowing beer mugs in hand, the joyful villagers tease each other about using the magnificent once-a-year Saint's Birth festival as a simple excuse to drink. Humbly turning his attention back to the village chief, an eager Reynolds earnestly asks if there is absolutely anything else he can do to help. The conversation pauses as Florina happily calls out to the old man, prompting the respectful chief to warmly acknowledge her arrival. Smiling broadly, the old chief excitedly announces that the secret preparations are finally complete and it is time for the grand unveiling. A murmuring crowd gathers in the village square as someone calls for everyone's attention. With a swift, dramatic motion, someone prepares to yank away a large cloth cover. The grand reveal unveils a majestic, towering statue of Reynolds striking a heroic pose. Startled by the extravagant display, Reynolds stares in absolute, sweaty mortification. The joyous villagers proudly announce that they collaborated with the village chief to erect this statue honoring Master Reynolds as their savior. Admiring the gallant figure, Livia earnestly declares that she will offer prayers to it every single day from now on. While Livia praises its magnificence, Reynolds inwardly vows to hide the embarrassing statue in the underground storage later. Raising their mugs high, the festive villagers propose a loud toast to Master Reynolds as they plan to feast until morning. Smiling warmly under the starry night sky, Livia joyfully joins the cheering crowd celebration. Watching the happy villagers, a gentle smile crosses Reynolds' face as he admits that this lively outcome isn't so bad either. The warm festivities continue brightly into the night. Meanwhile, a horse-drawn carriage speeds past a window where the mustachioed village chief watches from inside. Leaving the party behind, Reynolds and Livia stroll peacefully through the snow-covered landscape beneath a brilliant, starry sky. Suddenly, Livia turns her head after noticing a small movement in the quiet snow. She cheerfully points out a little rabbit to Master Reynolds. Reaching out with a gentle hand, Reynolds softly pats her snow-dusted head. Looking up with wide, sparkling eyes, Livia sincerely thanks him for the kind gesture. Strolling quietly beside her, Reynolds casually points out that 2 months have already passed since she first arrived here. Livia's expression shifts to sudden concern as she wonders if he thinks it is time for her to return to the royal capital. Gripping her cloak tightly, Livia passionately declares that she will not return even if he tells her to. Stopping in the snow, Reynolds surprises her by firmly stating that he no longer wishes for her to leave. Livia turns back to him, her eyes wide with stunned disbelief. Reynolds gazes back at her with a profound, deeply serious expression. He solemnly reflects that during his 5 years in the frontier, he selfishly focused only on himself and completely missed the kind people and beautiful scenery around him. A warm light enters his eyes as he admits that ever since she arrived, his entire world feels like it has grown wonderfully wider. His expression tightens with painful memories as he recounts the sheer terror he felt when he thought he might lose her after finding her battered body. Blushing furiously, Livia stammers in confusion, wondering why he is suddenly saying all these emotional things. She stands perfectly still in the snowy path, anxiously waiting for his next words. Reaching out to hold a lock of her hair, Reynald tenderly asks her to stay by his side forever. Before the romantic moment can resolve, a sudden noise startles them both, causing them to jump in surprise. Arriving through the thick snow, a mysterious carriage suddenly halts at the mansion gates. Reynald's eyes widen in sheer panic as he instantly recognizes the ominous crest on the carriage door. Staring in disbelief at the arriving guards, he mutters that this uninvited visit simply cannot be happening. A wicked, toothy grin spreads across the mustached man's face as he prepares to confront his target. Stepping out confidently, the arrogant visitor sneers and greets Reynald as a lowly criminal. Glaring fiercely at the intruder, Reynald bitterly spits out the name of Lord Golan. While Florina questions the stranger's identity, Reynald grimly explains that the man is the governing lord of this territory. Clenching his jaw, Reynald recounts how this corrupt lord actively conspired against him with neighboring rulers. He angrily reveals that Golan maliciously spread vicious slander about him throughout the entire frontier. Bursting into boisterous laughter, Golan mockingly declares it perfectly natural to warn his people about a traitor who sought to destroy the kingdom. Florina watches with deep concern as a tense silence falls over the cornered and trembling mage. Flanked by his armed guards, the smug lord points his cane and announces he has official business to conduct. Thrusting his cane forward, Golan ruthlessly commands Reynald to vacate the mansion immediately. Reynald freezes in absolute shock as the sudden eviction order shatters his fragile peace. Golan haughtily reveals that his orders come directly from a recent letter sent by Chancellor Charles Noir of the royal capital. Hearing that hated name, Reynald recoils in pure fury while Florina gasps in alarm beside him. Knowing Charles orchestrated his unjust exile, Reynald furiously demands to know what the mastermind could possibly want now. Chuckling arrogantly, Golan relays that the Chancellor expects him to endlessly subjugate monsters on the frontier to serve the kingdom. He adds with a sadistic smile that Reynald's new residence will be perfectly suited for a man of his standing. The Lord cruelly describes the destination as an uninhabitable wasteland swarming with lethal monsters where a genius mage can supposedly thrive. Scoffing at Reynald's despair, Golan cruelly remarks that a nuisance like him should have just stayed hidden. Refusing to tolerate this blatant cruelty, Florina fiercely steps forward and shouts that their tyrannical demands are unacceptable. Glaring down at the defiant girl, the insulted lord arrogantly demands to know which peasant village raised such an insolent child. Standing tall against the winter wind, she proudly declares herself as Florina, the only daughter of the prestigious Rosenheim family. The smug lord's face instantly pales as he stammers out the legendary family name in absolute terror. Panic entirely consumes Golan as he frantically bows and begs forgiveness from the daughter of a powerful ducal house. Sweating profusely, he desperately questions why someone of such high nobility is out here in the frozen frontier. With unflinching confidence and a blazing stare, she proudly announces that she is Lord Reynald's devoted wife. Frozen in utter bewilderment, the trembling lord can only squeak out the word in sheer disbelief. The ridiculous twist of fate leaves the previously arrogant intruders completely dumbfounded by the terrifying reality of their mistake. A pompous official mockingly apologizes, sneering that he had never expected a noble daughter from a ducal house to willingly become the wife of a convicted criminal. Glaring at Reynald, the official concludes that Lady Florina must obviously be under the influence of his devious seduction magic. He arrogantly points a finger, insisting that a lady of her stature would otherwise never choose to bind herself to such a ruined man. Stepping forward with fierce conviction, Florina immediately interrupts to declare that Reynald does not use any seduction magic. She stands tall in the falling snow, confidently asserting that there is absolutely no need for him to resort to magic. Pressing a hand warmly against her chest, she sincerely confesses that her heart has belonged to Master Reynald from the very beginning. She proudly reveals that she made the choice to marry him as a child and came to the frontier entirely of her own free will. Caught completely off guard by her heartfelt confession, Reynolds stares at her with wide, astonished eyes as the snow gently falls around them. Turning her radiant smile toward him, she playfully asks if her words are not the absolute truth. Blushing slightly, she lovingly calls him her husband, cementing their unbreakable bond in front of the hostile royal guards. Furious at their defiance, the official threatens that if they refuse to comply, his men will remove them by sheer force. Waving his hand aggressively, he barks a harsh order for his men to attack. Without hesitation, a squad of heavily armored guards charges forward with leveled spears, forcing Reynolds to step protectively in front of his wife. Reacting to the deadly threat, Reynolds fiercely summons a crackling sphere of lightning magic into his hand. The official smirks arrogantly, taunting Reynolds by asking if he is truly certain he wishes to use magic against them. He menacingly reminds the exiled noble that raising a sword against men acting under royal orders is no different from outright treason. Reynolds grits his teeth in sheer frustration, fully aware that the penalty for such a rebellion would be his immediate execution. Unwilling to let him take the fall, Florina begins to channel her own radiant magic, resolving to fight in his place. Reynolds desperately grabs her arm, frantically screaming for her to stop. Pulling her back, he begs her not to risk her fragile life by drawing on that dangerous power again. Ignoring their frantic exchange, the official ruthlessly orders his men to seize the criminal at once. Suddenly, a booming, ethereal voice echoes across the snowy battlefield, angrily declaring that it will not allow this injustice. A massive pillar of divine light violently erupts from the sky, instantly scattering the startled guards and driving them back. Looking up into the blinding radiance, a terrified guard stammers in awe as an immense pair of wings materializes. The soldiers completely freeze in absolute horror as they realize they are facing a legendary dragon. Staring up at the majestic beast, Florina gasps in overwhelming relief and happily calls out Livia's name. Looking around in sheer panic, the bewildered official demands to know who just spoke with such terrifying authority. A colossal reptilian eye glares down, mockingly noting the guard's passable magic while scoffing that someone of the official's pitiful level cannot even perceive its form. Crushed by the unseen beast's overwhelming magical pressure, the pompous official trembles in absolute terror. The magnificent spirit dragon proudly introduces itself as the ancient beast that once forged a contract with a saintess to vanquish evil from the world. Chapter 10. The towering spirit dragon fiercely declares that Florina is its contractor and it will permit no one to harm her. Standing resolutely in the snow, Reynolds firmly adds that he will not allow them to lay a hand on the boy either. He glares menacingly at the threat, challenging them to face him as an opponent if they cannot accept his terms. Terrified by the overwhelming presence, the unseen cowardly enemies let out a pathetic shriek. The panicked antagonists quickly flee in a carriage, shouting empty threats about reporting this to Lord Charles Noir. Silence returns to the snowy landscape as Reynolds and Livia stand peacefully together. Turning his attention back to his companion, Reynolds gently asks Livia if she is all right. Smiling softly, Livia reassures him while explaining that she was carefully restraining her power. She pauses and looks up curiously as she softly calls out Master Reynolds' name. With a conflicted expression, Reynolds admits that he had deliberately refrained from asking her questions until now. He notes in awe that a spirit dragon is a legendary being spoken of only in ancient myths. His brow furrows in concern as he questions why she would agree to such a contract and what its dangerous terms might be. Livia offers only a quiet, mysterious smile in response to his serious inquiries. Leaning forward playfully, she teases him that bombarding a woman with questions will surely make her dislike him. She immediately follows up with a bright, enthusiastic declaration that she could never actually dislike her beloved husband. Reynolds softly relents, assuring her that he will not press her for answers if she wishes to keep her secrets. However, his tone shifts to strict sincerity as he asks her to make him one unbreakable promise. Livia gazes up at him with wide, attentive eyes, waiting for his request. Staring deeply into her eyes, Reynolds pleads with her to never use that reckless power again because seeing her hurt deeply pains him. Touched by his profound concern, a silent wave of emotion washes over Livia's delicate features. A radiant smile breaks across her face as she happily praises Master Reynolds for his boundless kindness. She joyfully credits him for being so wise and caring toward everyone, from the simple villagers to herself. A heavy pause falls between them as Reynolds looks away and quietly mutters that she has completely misunderstood him. Meeting her gaze with intense vulnerability, he softly confesses that he cares so deeply simply because it is her. The snowy wind softly blows between the two as they stand frozen in the sudden, emotionally charged silence. Confused by his sudden confession, Livia tilts her head, prompting Reynold to hastily brush off his own words. She continues to stare at him in quiet wonder, softly repeating his name under her breath. Looking away awkwardly, Reynold hesitantly asks to hold her hand, using the slippery ground as a clumsy excuse. He nervously rambles on, adding that the freezing weather must be making her delicate fingers unbearably cold. Blushing with a tender smile, Livia gently reaches her hand out to accept his warm grasp. Gently intertwining their fingers, the two share a tender and quiet moment in the cold air. Gazing at him with a blushing smile, Florina happily murmurs that Master Reynold's hand feels wonderfully warm. He looks forward with a softened expression, fully absorbing the peaceful stillness of the winter evening. Hand in hand, they walk together through the gently falling snow toward the grand gates of the mansion. Later, inside the library, a troubled Reynold grimly reads a letter, muttering that he had a feeling this might happen. Stepping forward with deep concern, Florina notices his distress and softly asks what is troubling him. He looks up with a tense gaze, explaining that Lord Golan has officially reported her immense power to the royal capital. Recognizing the royal crest on the envelope, she anxiously asks if the terrifying letter was sent by Chancellor Charles Noir. Reynold corrects her, revealing that the sender is actually His Majesty King Ferald of the Griffiths' Kingdom himself. He solemnly relays that the king has issued a direct command wishing to personally meet with Florina. Blinking in complete bewilderment, she points to herself and asks why His Majesty would want to meet a simple maid. She muses aloud that it is incredibly serious for the king to personally send such an official letter. Smiling cheerfully, she tries to reassure him by stating she will simply and politely decline the royal invitation. Lowering his eyes, Reynold gravely warns her that the political situation is unfortunately not that simple. He explains that outright refusing a royal summons could easily result in her being charged with high treason against the state. Hearing she could be labeled an enemy of the kingdom, she stands firmly beside him to face the dire consequences. Staring at the stamped wax seal, he emphasizes that the letter is an absolute official decree from the royal family. He grimly clarifies that defying its contents is equivalent to defying royal authority itself and declaring war on the nation. Completely unfazed, she smiles brightly and fiercely declares that she wouldn't mind opposing the kingdom at all. Sweating slightly, Reynold notes that her terrifying loyalty doesn't sound like a joke, while she blushes and promises to do whatever he commands. Drawing his attention back to the parchment, he murmurs that there is more written in the royal decree. He turns to her from the sofa, revealing a crucial condition regarding her potential return to the royal capital. Reading the final lines, he shockingly reveals that if she complies, all of his past crimes will be officially pardoned. Her eyes widen in pure astonishment as she realizes Lord Reynold's unjust exile will finally be completely lifted. Clasping her hands with sparkling eyes, she enthusiastically insists they depart for the royal capital at once. Pressing his fingers firmly against the parchment, Reynold immediately shoots down the idea as completely impossible. He explains that her extraordinary power rivals the saintess of old, though Florina remains confused as to why that makes the trip dangerous. Looking away thoughtfully, he reminds her that the Griffiths' kingdom was originally founded by that very same legendary saintess. He warns that her immense magical authority might lead the public to believe she is more fit to rule the nation than the current royal family. Florina reels back in sheer shock, exclaiming with wide eyes that such a treasonous idea is completely absurd. Standing her ground, Florina adamantly declares that she has never harbored any desire to become the queen. The royal official sternly rebukes her, explaining that His Majesty intends to bring her under royal control regardless of her personal wishes. Pressing the grim reality of the situation, the official warns that she might even be forced to become one of the king's consorts at worst. Desperately rejecting this fate, she clings to Reynold and vows that he is the only husband she will ever have. Reynold solemnly reflects on his exile caused by his own weakness, admitting that he has absolutely no desire to return to the royal capital either. Plagued by dark memories, Reynold remembers the furious mobs who once screamed for him to rot in hell as a traitor to the kingdom. Bringing himself back to the bitter present, he notes with a heavy heart that the hatred of the people will not fade easily. Listening to his painful confession, Florina stares at him with eyes brimming with deep, unwavering compassion. Suddenly fueled by fierce determination, she steps forward and confidently tells Reynold to leave everything to her. Catching him completely off guard, She boldly announces her plan to travel to the capital and negotiate directly with the king himself. She passionately explains her intention to force the king to officially acknowledge her right to live peacefully on the frontier with her husband. Turning eagerly to depart without a second thought, she promises to offer something in return to secure their freedom. Panic instantly flashing across his face, Reynold reaches out and frantically shouts for her to wait. He desperately warns her that the treacherous royal palace is crawling with greedy nobles looking to exploit the Saintess's power. Gripping her shoulders, he outlines the terrifying reality that she could be permanently confined and stripped of her freedom. Smiling gently to ease his fears, she reminds him that her status as the daughter of the powerful Rosenheim ducal house will protect her. She reassures him that her influential parents, who always regretted failing to save him in the past, will firmly take their side. As a final resort, she casually mentions that she can always borrow the overwhelming magical power of the great spirit dragon Livia. Hearing her carelessly suggest using the dangerous magic again, Reynolds' face contorts in absolute horror and frustration. Grabbing her roughly, he angrily yells that she had explicitly promised never to use that life-threatening power so recklessly. Shocked by his sudden burst of anger and rough handling, a startled Florina tentatively calls out his name. Pushed past his breaking point by her lack of self-preservation, he furiously demands to know why she is always so careless with her own life. Flinching away from his intense outburst, Florina tightly squeezes her eyes shut as his grip tightens on her arm. She lets out a pained whimper, quietly murmuring that his iron grip is physically hurting her. Instantly realizing his mistake, Reynold releases her arm like he was burned and mutters a heavy apology. Unable to meet her gaze, he turns away in deep shame and admits that he needs some time alone to cool his head. Reaching her hand out toward his retreating back, Florina watches helplessly as her husband walks out of the room. A heavy, melancholic silence settles over the grand frontier mansion as the snow continues to fall outside. Distracted by her swirling thoughts, a clumsy maid accidentally trips and sends a massive stack of heavy books crashing to the floor. Kneeling defeatedly amidst the scattered books, the clumsy maid sighs heavily and laments her constant mistakes. Chapter 11. A gentle voice suddenly asks the weeping girl if she is all right. Livia cries uncontrollably while frantically wondering what she should do now. Tears streaming down her face, she wails that Lord Reynold surely hates her now. The spirit dragon commands her to calm down as she sobs about hurting Reynolds' feelings by mentioning the royal capital. The dragon firmly assures her that the young lord was merely worried about her safety rather than feeling any hatred. Wiping her tears, Livia decides to quickly finish her housework before properly apologizing to him later. While cleaning the dusty room, she spots an unfamiliar book resting silently on a lower shelf. She carefully pulls the worn volume out and gently wipes the thick grime from its cover. The text inside reveals a depressing account of the writer being completely shunned by the villagers and hated throughout the kingdom. Livia gasps in sudden realization that she is actually reading Lord Reynolds' private diary. Continuing to read, she discovers a painful entry about him writing to an old friend and receiving no reply. A flashback shows a devastated Reynolds sitting at his desk and agonizing over his unanswered letters. Clutching his face in deep despair, the exiled lord quietly mutters the name Iris. Livia stares at the pages in stunned silence as she processes the unfamiliar name. The heartbreaking journal entry continues with Reynold desperately pleading to speak with Iris. As Livia struggles to recognize the name, the dragon correctly guesses it must be an old acquaintance of the boy. A sudden memory strikes Livia as she identifies Lady Iris as King Ferald's younger sister. She stunningly reveals to the spirit that the beautiful princess is actually Lord Reynolds' former lover. The spirit dragon reels in absolute shock at the revelation that the king's little sister was romantically involved with its contractor's savior. Livia recalls that the exceptionally beautiful royal was constantly surrounded by an endless flood of marriage proposals. She remembers that despite all her high-ranking suitors, Iris completely devoted herself to the genius Mage. Livia reminisces about seeing them together in high society and noting how incredibly intimate they always seemed. Her expression darkens as she notes that immediately after Reynolds' exile, Lady Iris married the new chancellor, Lord Charnoir. Livia gasps aloud as she processes the horrifying name of the very man who ruined Reynolds' life. The dragon angrily questions why the princess would willingly marry the mastermind who framed Reynold. Remembering the lavish wedding, Livia notes that Lady Iris looked deeply unhappy, heavily implying a forced marriage. A somber memory flashes of the beautiful, veiled bride shedding a tragic tear on her wedding day. Returning to the diary, The heartbreaking ink reveals Reynolds begging for a single reply while fearing she had grown to hate him. The final devastating line of the entry simply confesses his undying, lingering love for her. Livia clutches the open diary to her chest as fresh tears well up in her trembling eyes. Florina reflects with a heavy heart, admitting to herself that she secretly felt relieved when she learned Lady Iris had married another man. Overwhelmed by guilt, she casts her gaze downward and castigates herself for harboring such awful, selfish thoughts. She sorrowfully acknowledges her deepest desires, confessing that she has always dreamed of marrying Lord Reynolds. Gripped by profound insecurity, she laments that her presence seems to do nothing but constantly upset the man she deeply loves. She mournfully concludes that the one he truly wanted to return to his side was never her in the first place. A sudden spark of profound realization flashes within her tearful, widened eyes. Clenching her jaw with newfound resolve, she firmly declares to the empty air that she has finally made her decision. Clapping her hands together, she brightly announces her intention to travel to the royal capital after all. Standing before the shadowy dragon, she explains that going to the capital will allow Lord Reynolds to return and reunite with Lady Iris, though the creature seems strongly against her departure. Smiling optimistically, she reasons that His Majesty might help resolve the mystery behind Lady Iris's marriage to Lord Charles Noir, since Iris is Reynolds' own sister. Blinking in confusion at the spirit's doubt, she questions why she wouldn't be completely fine with this self-sacrificing plan. The imposing spirit gently challenges her cheerful facade, asking if she didn't genuinely desire to marry the boy herself. Her falsely bright expression instantly shatters as the spirit's piercing question strikes directly at the vulnerable core of her heart. Standing small before the towering entity, she quietly confesses her eternal, unwavering love for Lord Reynolds. Gently packing a dark cloak into her suitcase, she melancholically admits that forcing her feelings onto him would be a purely selfish act. With a bittersweet smile gracing her delicate profile, she vows to never let her own feelings obstruct his path to true happiness. She carefully pats down the folded garments inside her trunk, finalizing her silent preparations for the arduous journey ahead. Beaming through her hidden sorrow, she confidently declares that marriage is only truly happy when both people genuinely love one another. Outside the mansion, a fierce winter snowstorm rages across the jagged, pine-covered mountain landscape. Her sturdy leather suitcase rests firmly on the icy cobblestones, fully packed and ready for her solitary departure. Gazing back at the sprawling estate, she confirms to the spirit that she must leave in secret because Reynolds would undoubtedly stop her. She casts one final, longing glance over her shoulder, her beautiful eyes shimmering with unshed tears of farewell. Whispering a tender goodbye into the freezing air, she silently bids the grand estate and her beloved master to take care. Her hand freezes on the wrought iron gate as a familiar, stern voice suddenly demands to know if she was planning to abandon him without a word. Gasping in pure shock, she slowly turns to find an imposing figure emerging from the snowy mist directly behind her. A dramatic close-up reveals his hardened expression and unexpectedly altered appearance as he steps forward to confront her. Looking absolutely regal in an ornate, formal uniform with his signature long hair shockingly cut short, Reynolds strides out of the estate with a commanding, lordly presence. His piercing gaze locks intensely onto her, the severe new haircut framing his sharp, aristocratic features in a completely new light. Utterly stunned by his majestic transformation, she breathlessly stammers out Lord Reynolds' name into the winter wind. As she points out his drastically shortened hair in total disbelief, he simply stares back and calmly asks her if the new style looks strange. Packing his bags in quiet solitude, Reynolds solemnly reflects on the need to clean himself up before his impending journey to the royal capital. Reaching out to grab her luggage, he catches a completely bewildered Florina off guard. Taking her hand amidst the gently falling snow, a determined Reynolds boldly declares that they will go to the royal capital together. Her eyes go wide with pure shock as she processes his completely unexpected proposition. He calmly explains that he has already secured permission to attend her royal audience, having noticed her secretly packing for the past few days. Looking deeply into her eyes, he fiercely promises to persuade the king and ensure she is not forced into the royal family. Gripping his suitcase firmly, Reynolds softly vows that he wants to protect her just as much as she wants to protect him. Overwhelmed by his heartfelt confession, tears of pure joy begin to well up in her shimmering eyes. Suddenly, a fleeting and painful memory of a woman named Iris declaring her lingering love flashes through his mind. His dark eyes narrow slightly as he quietly pushes the lingering phantom of his past aside. Bringing his focus back to the present, he watches his beautiful wife offer a remarkably warm and gentle smile. Leaning securely against his strong chest, she happily agrees to his protective plan. She affectionately asks her husband to take good care of her during their long journey to the towering capital. Pushing open the massive wrought iron gate, Reynolds quietly confirms his unwavering commitment to her safety. A look of absolute resolve settles across his handsome face as he prepares to face his turbulent past. After a long journey, the majestic Griffiths Castle finally looms over them as they arrive in the heart of the royal capital. Walking past the heavily armored guards, a wide-eyed Florina marvels at the sheer scale of the royal architecture. Guiding her through the grand halls, Reynolds explains that they will be resting inside the castle until their royal audience tomorrow. Turning to him with a radiant expression, she gratefully thanks him for his constant guidance and support. Gesturing forward with a soft expression, he gently prompts her to continue down the ornate corridor. However, a dark shadow crosses his mind as he silently realizes that something feels deeply unsettling about their arrival. He grimly recalls the distinctly uncomfortable atmosphere that has haunted them throughout their entire journey. While his wife walks with a carefree smile, a tense Reynolds notices the castle staff and guards actively avoiding his gaze. Suddenly, an elegantly dressed woman pauses in the grand stone hallway as she catches sight of Reynolds' familiar silhouette. Recognizing his distinct features, the mysterious woman breathlessly calls out a familiar nickname. Turning to face him completely, her eyes wide with disbelief, the stunning woman trembles with overwhelming emotion. Stopping dead in his tracks, Reynolds gasps in pure shock as he comes face to face with a ghost from his past. Sensing the sudden tension, a confused Florina turns back and silently wonders if this beautiful woman is the elusive Iris. Stepping forward with a brilliant, tearful smile, Iris excitedly confirms that it really is him. Overjoyed by the unexpected reunion, she happily exclaims that he has finally returned to the royal capital. A voice casually announces that they came along specifically to accompany Florina. Someone echoes Florina's name in a tone of mild confusion. The speaker then smoothly offers to formally introduce her to the gathering. While Florina hauls a large trunk in the background, a man begins to introduce her to a dark-haired woman. Taking the initiative, the blonde mage steps forward and politely introduces herself as Florina Rosenheim. She earnestly recounts how Lord Reynolds bravely saved her life in the past. With a bright, cheerful demeanor, she immediately clarifies that they are currently just friends. Struck by the unexpected friend-zoning, Reynolds freezes in absolute, sweaty disbelief. Florina happily excuses herself and walks ahead while a panicked Reynolds reaches out to frantically question her statement. Before he can follow her, an urgent voice cries out for him to wait. The unseen woman passionately confesses that she has wanted to see him for a desperately long time. Reynolds turns back, his face flushed and sweating as a complex wave of emotional shock washes over him. A somber internal thought echoes through the tension, resigning to the bittersweet hope that their beloved simply finds happiness.